And welcome again to the Robert Barham Show. I am Robert Barham. I'm here today with another wonderful guest, my good friend, Mr. Gabe Abelson, who is a former head writer for not only the Late Night with David Letterman program, but a number of other shows. Gabe, welcome to the Robert Barham Show today. How are you, my friend?
Thanks. I'm doing well. It's good to see you again, Doc. It's been a while.
You too, yeah. Gabe, for those who are listening who might not know, because while they might not know your name, they certainly probably know your jokes that have been told by David Letterman. Where else did you work as a writer in late night television?
Well, from Letterman, I wrote a couple of pilots for MTV. Then I got a call to come out to the West Coast to write for a show called Politically Incorrect that used to be on ABC. Then I was on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. And head writer and showrunner of the Tom Green Show and Late Show with Craig Kilborn. A lot of late night stuff.
Wow. Now, how many years does that span all told, if I could ask you there, Gabe?
Well, my TV career, which hopefully at some point will resume.
How many years did all of that has that been?
Well, I started at Late Show in 97. So 23 years. And previous to that, I did stand-up solely for a living during the golden era of stand-up when you actually could make a great living, even as an unknown comic in the 80s and early 90s. So I did stand-up for 17 years before I got into TV. And I'd wanted to be a stand-up comic since I was a kid.
Wow. 17 years? Is that what you said?
17 years. And without that, I do not think for a second I would have gotten the Letterman job. Because I was the head writer of the monologue, specifically that department.
So for 17 years, you were doing stand-up comedy. And were you doing stand-up like the sort of, some people refer to it as like the glory days or the golden era of stand-up comedy?
Absolutely.
I remember myself being in college at Virginia Tech University and watching late night television every night before I'd go to bed. I even remember being in the dorm room my freshman year, going to we didn't have a TV set, so you had to go to the lounge to watch.
Right.
And I'd tune into Leno and Letterman, and I remember actually watching. This was when Leno was showing up regularly on Letterman as a comic.
Yeah. And
they had the recurring "What's my beef?"
What's my beef, Dave? Yep. Coming with the black motorcycle.
That I had an aspiration to become a stand-up comedian, and I hadn't even gone out, and I hadn't got into theater in the performing arts program yet. It was my first year. Anyway, I just remember Jay with that recurring bit being very funny, laughing so hard, and he said something about how difficult it was to be on the road as a traveling comedian. And I sat there with a bowl of cereal at 11:30 at night or what have you, thinking to myself, man, I would do anything to be on the road as a stand-up comedian. That just sounded like heaven to me. And so was that the kind of thing you were doing, that sort of thing, traveling from gig to gig?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I started really, it was a pivotal year when I started. I was too young and of course couldn't have known what stand-up would become. But before I got into stand-up, there was really no way to make a living as an unknown. The guys that made a living, like George Carlin, whatever, they were working the Playboy Club circuit, which of course then ceased to exist. There were no dedicated comedy clubs other than the Improv in New York and LA, and maybe Catch Rising Star, but there was not this nationwide opening of comedy clubs. That happened in the early 80s, and I was lucky enough to benefit from that. And so absolutely, right out of college, I studied acting for 4 years in college, but I already knew I wanted to be a comic. And the second I graduated college, I auditioned at the comic strip in New York, and that started my whole run. But absolutely, I was thrilled to go on the road. In fact, my first gig on the road, I think I was 23. I worked the comic strip in Fort Lauderdale, and I think it was $300 for the week. And to be 23 years old and making any money and being paid to go to Florida to work for a week, I was living the dream.
That is definitely living the dream. So you went to school. I didn't know that you went to school for theater and for acting.
I did. I studied with the founder of the method, Lee Strasberg, for 4 years.
So, oh, wow. No kidding.
Yep.
And what was, now, how did studying as an actor under Strasberg, what are the sorts of things that it did to help you to become a stand-up comic? Because most comics don't go to school for acting. And I know myself from going to school at Virginia Tech for theater, there's a lot of stuff that you learn, but what kind of stuff did you learn that you feel really helped you to become a better comic?
Well, I think really the only time there's crossover, and it's something that actually I can help actors with, but it doesn't really, the only way I think it benefits is when you do what they call act outs in stand-up, when you do a character, or even when you do an impression, acting training helps. I don't think it helps at all in terms of just straight ahead, jokes or straight ahead stand-up.
Right, monology.
When it involves in inhabiting, another character, another persona, then absolutely the training helps.
Yeah. No. So you were 17 years. So that's 4 years training in acting. Had you done any theater prior to going to school for it? Did you do any theater in high school?
I did. I took an acting class in high school, but I never actually did a single production. Okay. And once I graduated from, I went to NYU.
I wondered whether or not you were one of those kids who started at the age of 7 or 8 or that kind of thing.
No, but I did audition at the Improv in New York when I was 16. And it was fun, but then I just stopped until I got out of college. I didn't.
Between then and when you were in college or after, right then, did you kind of harbor the secret dream or desire?
Absolutely. I did cabarets in college at their little black box theater all the time. I did stand up whenever I could.
Oh, okay. I got it. So you were doing acting and going and doing stand up in college too.
Yes. I wasn't hitting the clubs yet, but I was doing it in college performances,
Okay.
Cabaret nights, stuff like that.
So you've got your time in high school, your college, and then after that, there you are, you're on the circuit working all over the United States when this thing is blowing up for the first time in the history of the United States. And
right.
That was a pretty magical time. I mean,
it was.
There were clubs that were opening up everywhere. It was a really abundant time. And
the level of quality level of stand-up was completely different back then because there were so many fewer comics, and the ones that were working were all great. I mean, now if you go into the Comedy Store, the Improv on a Saturday, which is the biggest night, and any name comes in, whether it's Dave Chappelle or whether it's Seinfeld to do a guest spot, whatever, or lesser known comics, it's a huge deal. When I started in 1980, you could go into the comic strip on a Monday, a Tuesday, a Wednesday, what you would think of as a dead night, and the lineup would be Jerry Seinfeld, Paul Reiser, Rita Rudner, Ellen DeGeneres, Chris Rock, Adam Sandler, Ray Romano, Kevin James. This would all be on one show on a midweek. So the quality of the comedy you were getting was, I believe, superior. It wasn't as watered down.
Well, it's funny that you say that. I remember when I was watching those shows come online on television. First it was you'd see these guys on you'd see them on with Carson, and then Leno and Letterman, and then I remember seeing, for example, Evening at the Improv came on,
right,
television series. And then I remember for myself that when I started going on the road, I began to work with all these guys who had become sort of my inspirational heroes. Guys you mentioned, like I remember being in college and opening for Ellen DeGeneres and going, wow, these people are real. I'm really getting to work with these people. And you're right, they are fine comedians. All of them. It was a really high quality. Who were some of your comedic influences or heroes, people that, really inspired you to be the successful person that you are today as a writer and comic?
The successful person I am at home today, stuck in my kitchen. There's one person, it's funny. Sometimes you can mention a number of influences, and I did have some, but the biggest influence by far was George Carlin. Because when I was about 10 years old, There was a very kind, very elderly lady who used to sit downstairs on the bench in New York where I grew up and tell me stories. Her name was Mary Carlin. And when I got Carlin's record and I opened up the Class Clown album, it was a block away from me. He grew up a block away from me and his mother still lived there. And she used to tell me stories about George, and she was a great storyteller, not surprisingly. And so, and plus I thought, I started to buy more and more comedy albums as contemporaries, all of Carlin's contemporaries. And George, to me, was always number one, and the guy that I wanted to be.
He's like the Michael Jordan of comedy. I mean, he would just he and
Pryor are the two, I think, if you ask most comedians, they'll say they were the two greatest at that specific occupation.
So when you grew up, you were actually talking with Carlin's
mom.
And did you know that? Did you realize it at the time?
I didn't at first, but then a few years later, when I got my first comedy album, which was a George Carlin album, I went, holy crap, this is my block, or this is the block next to mine. And, obviously I put it together and I found out it was her. And what's interesting is I've worked with a lot of Carlin's contemporaries doing stand-up over the years, Robert Klein and David Brenner, but I never met Carlin. And so it was probably 15 years into my career, I was doing a show on A&E when they used to have comics all the time, Caroline's Comedy Hour, and the producer had worked with Carlin. And I said, I've never written a letter to another comic, but I would love to write George and just tell him the influence he had on me and talk about his mom and the neighborhood that we grew up in. So she gave me a address, a P.O. box. I wrote to him. And a couple months later, my wife comes running into my office going, Gabe, George Carlin's on the phone. He actually called me. And
really? From the letter?
Huh?
From the letter?
From the letter. I mentioned a couple of things in the letter that no one would know unless they knew his mother and the neighborhood, specifically so he'd know I wasn't just some, I never did that. I never wrote fan letters or anything, but I wanted to tell him what an inspiration he was. And then years after that, not long after that, when I started at Letterman, he was on the show one night, and that was when I got to meet him. So that whole thing sort of came full circle.
Wow. What was that completely like? I mean, that would have been, for me, that something like that would have been a dream come true. It was mind-blowing.
It was mind-blowing. It was unforgettable. Yeah.
Wow. So did you guys keep kind of in touch after that, or?
Not really. I think it was just that one time that I saw him, we talked a bit, and that was it. But I did have other influences, like the people I mentioned, Robert Klein and David Brenner and Richard Pryor and Bob Newhart and a lot of people back then.
And did you have the good fortune to meet some of those guys who were your kind of your mentors in a sense?
Well, I worked with Klein a number of times, and I always thought he was one of the funniest.
Yeah.
By far. And I worked with, Sam Kinison and Bill Hicks, just many, Rich Jenny, who may not be a household name, but should have been.
Yeah, Jenny was so funny. I remember working with him.
He was as good as it got. And nobody, including the top comics, they'll tell you nobody could exhaust a premise like Rich Jenny. Just when you thought there were no more jokes to squeeze out of it, he would find a way.
I was going to say, that almost sounds like it's not a compliment, but it is highest of compliments.
Highest of compliments, absolutely.
Yeah. So there you are, just to back up again, high school, college, you're out on the road for 17 years. And then there has to be a transition in there somewhere where you land your first TV writing gig. Is that what happened?
Well, it was very unusual route into doing it. Like I was doing audience warm-up for Bill Maher's show, Politically Incorrect, and I don't know why this had never hit me before. I never thought of it, but I'm warming up the audience. That's, it's a job for comics, a good job, well-paying job, but a very difficult one. Because your job is just to keep them entertained, and they don't want to see you. They want to see the show that's being taped. So I watched his monologue, and I said to the executive producer, hey, if I have an idea for a monologue joke, can I give it to you? He said, well, we have a fax team. It's kind of a thankless job. You'll send a bunch. If you're lucky, you'll get one on. It's $50. Bill only does 6 jokes. We look to our staff writers first. And so I thought, what the heck, I'd try it. And the first night I ever tried it, half the monologue was mine, 3 out of the 6 jokes. And this happened not every night, 3 jokes, but consistently for a few weeks. And then they put me on a retainer, which means you've never worked in TV before. We're not giving you a staff job, but we want to get, you're valuable enough that we want to know that you're going to send 10 to 20 jokes every day. So what had happened is the money in stand-up back then, now we're talking like the mid-90s, early 90s, had gone down. Yeah. And so it brought me sort of back up. And as you know, stand-ups really have nothing to do during the day. So I would write my monologue jokes during the day and then perform at night. And I didn't really have a career plan, but I was loving it. I was loving it. It was a skill. It's so interesting how you can discover a skill that you didn't even know you had. So they moved out to LA, which again also came full circle. I did eventually end up on staff. In fact, that's what got me to move to LA. When they moved to LA, they cut the whole fax program. And then I happened to be doing a one-night gig with the wife, who was the head monologue writer for Letterman. And I had my joke packet on me. And she said, these are really funny, And I said, I send them to your husband at Letterman? She said, sure. And the same thing happened. He put me on retainer. The money was a little more because it was network. It was CBS. At the time, the politically incorrect show was non-union. It was on Comedy Central, which was non-union at the time. And so I just, again, things happened quickly. Then the retainer happened quickly. But I never thought there'd be any room to get on the staff there because this gentleman, Bill, was the only one who was writing monologue at Letterman. Very unusual. Every other talk show I've ever worked on, the whole staff writes jokes. But it was just him for that portion of the show and the 10 people on his fax team and a couple of retainer guys. So one day he just called me up out of the blue to say, I'm writing a book. Would you be interested in my job? No, I want to go back to Fort Lauderdale. I don't want the $4,000 a week Writers Guild job with pension and health. No, why would I want that? So of course I said yes. I did have to, they had 5 people that interviewed for the job. And I think the fact that I was the only stand-up among them actually really helped me, because I think Dave wanted the person writing the monologue to know what it was like to have their own ass out on the line every night.
Right, yeah.
Because after the monologue, he would call me over to the desk. What do you think of the crowd? This, that, talk about the jokes. And so it was the most thrilling time in my life. And I realized, very quickly, sometimes what you may think is your strongest skill may not be your strongest skill. I believe I can deconstruct comedy like nobody on the planet, which is why I've been teaching it for over 30 years. But here was a skill, monologue writing. I didn't even know what I had, but judging from the incredibly short amount of time it took me to go from never having done it to arguably the most important job in late night at that time, Letterman, the monologue writer. That was an unbelievable gig. It was such a short period of time. And here I was, having done stand-up for 17 years. I realized, this is something I think I do even better than stand-up. And I didn't know I could do it just a couple of years ago.
Was there
way to it.
Was there, I don't know, maybe you've already answered this and I wasn't getting it, but if you write like a fiction writer, or you write like a screenwriter, or you write like a nonfiction writer, or you write like a stand-up comic, you write for that format, for that medium. When you go to write for late night, you're writing for a comic, but is there any difference that you...
It's completely different. In a sense, monologue writing is the opposite of stand-up, because stand-up, especially now, more so than back in the day when you and I did it, when a lot of it was observational, now it's really all about who you are as a comic. So you have to sort of peel back the layers of the onion, be willing to reveal your soul. What really bothers me, and here are my insecurities and idiosyncrasies. It's all about who you are. Whereas monologue is nothing about who the host is. Yeah, there are exceptions like Letterman, who would, always be sort of the idiot, put himself as the idiot in the joke, and Craig Ferguson, who talked a lot about his personal life and his 12-step program. But most hosts are just there to observe pop culture, politics, to talk about external stuff. So it's not really about who the host is. If you take, say, Jimmy Fallon, Seth Meyers, a lot of their jokes, with a minor tweak, could be done by the other comic. But if you look at someone, like a Dave Attell, or even go way back to a Sam Kinison, nobody else can do their stuff like them.
Sure, yeah.
So the difference is persona is half of the joke in stand-up. Persona is 0% of the joke in monologue writing. So monologue writing is by perspiration. You have to be able to sit down, write 20 jokes about topics in the news. Stand-up is more about inspiration. When you're out shopping and you go, oh, that's a funny thing with the credit card pad. I better write that down or put it in my voice recorder because I'll never remember it. And as you know, we don't. We think it will because it's the funniest thing we ever thought of. Then it's gone. Right. So it really, I think stand-up has to happen a lot more organically than monologue writing. You have to churn out those 20 jokes a day in monologue writing. Right. You churn them out as they happen in stand-up, as you experience. It's experiential.
Well, so obviously you're at this place in your life now with that much experience under your belt, where you are a stand-up comic, you're who's worked on the road in the comedy club scene, you're out in New York City, you are in LA, working as a warm-up comedian. Next thing you know, you're writing for late night television. You're writing for many different television.
Warm up was in New York City.
That was okay.
I had stopped performing when I got Letterman. So when I moved out to LA, I hadn't been on stage in 5 years.
Ah, okay. So now you are at a point now where it's safe to say that you can teach this stuff. You are a teacher. And with so many, there's a lot of teachers out there around the country, and many of them teach late night writing as well. What are you doing? What is in what you do and what you offer that?
Well, I'll say two things about that. I hope I can keep it to two things. But number one is, yes, there are a lot of people teaching late night, and unfortunately, far too many are not qualified to teach it. That doesn't mean they're not good teachers and they're not brilliant people with great comics, but there are a lot of teachers out there that will say, on their website, wrote for Jay Leno for 4 years. What I always advise people do, and I say you don't have to study with me, is go to IMDb, the International Movie Database, and look up that show, like The Tonight Show. And if that teacher's name is, because they have a list of every writer since whenever it first went on the air in the early 60s, late 50s, every writer that's ever been on staff is on that list. If the person claiming to have written for The Tonight Show is not on that list, that means they faxed jokes to the show, like I used to do. The problem is half of this business is it's very political, and there are things that you not only have to know how to do this technically, know the techniques and formulas of late night monologue, but you also have to have worked at the show on a daily basis, been in the writer's room, seen the politics, the social aspect of it, know what to submit, what not to submit on staff, what to say, what not to say, that there's a huge business part and political part and social part of the business that they cannot teach because they have not been on a staff. So the first thing I always say is research the teacher that you want to study with. Now, I've been teaching comedy writing since 1983, probably before I was qualified to do it, but I've always been very analytical with jokes, and I've always been able to deconstruct them. Even before I became a much stronger writer, I was able to, and I think a big part of that is my father's whole side of the family, they're all professors. And so I think teaching sort of runs in my blood. And so it's something I love doing as much as anything else, even writing or performing. And so I have a very specific program in learning how to write for late night laid out, and it's been a system that's sort of been perfected over the last couple of decades. And I truly believe that I can prepare someone for submission, for a submission to a show better than anyone. I have a lot of students that have applied to late night writers workshops at networks and then come to me, and then I show them, well, this shouldn't have been here. You shouldn't have done this. You should reverse that, taking this word out. And they go, man, I wish I had come to you before I submitted. Because you do only get one chance at a first impression. Just because you get submitted and turned down doesn't mean you can't submit again, but you can be sure that they're going to remember you by that first submission. So you have to know not only what to do, but what not to do. I get a lot of students that want to write for late night, and I see their first submission to me, and it's filled with stuff that could never get on network. Well, you send in a packet like that to a late show, and they see some joke, about, God forbid, somebody dying of coronavirus or something, and they say, well, this person clearly doesn't watch late night network television, or they would know not to do this. So I always tell people one of the most important things is to stay away from what I call first date subjects. Sexual orientation, race, religion, death, disease. It's just a matter of common sense. Once you're on a staff, you can submit any jokes you want. You got the gig. But in order to get the gig, when you're just showing them about 10 to 15 jokes, you want every joke. If your packet's going to be turned down, you want it to be because they don't find it funny. You don't want it to be because the content is inappropriate.
Right.
There's a very...
Like, when you're talking about, two things are coming up for me when I'm listening to you. One of them is you're talking about analyzing a joke. It's a bit like, and for those who may not know, if I were to give a metaphor or an analogy, you remember in school when we learned how to break down a sentence, like for the grammar?
Exactly. Diagramming a sentence. Yep.
Diagram a sentence for, like, here's the subject, here's the verb, here's the object, here's the modifiers of the verb, adverb, and things like that. You're talking about something a bit like that to understand, here's the premise, here's the setup, here's the punchline, here are the tags, here's that kind of thing. And then making sure the construction is, it's, to me, another metaphor is a little bit, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, but it's a little, sometimes it can get all the way down to, when you watch a jeweler with the jeweler's glass on their eye, and you're going through every facet of this gem that is a joke and making sure that it's just perfect all the way down to the last detail.
Absolutely.
When you perform it, that not only for the performer, the comedian, also for the audience member, the listener, it is a joy to behold. Yeah.
And, as succinct and concise as stand-up needs to be, and it should be, because your persona is a huge part of it, the placement of one word doesn't always make a huge difference in selling the joke. But the placement of one word, even an and or an or, in monologue can make or break the joke.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I love about it is it's, I think it was the first rule in that book I hated in school, The Elements of Style by Strunk and White.
Strunk and White, yeah.
Yeah, omit unnecessary words, and Seinfeld, whether you like him, you don't like him, is a genius at that. That's why he told him, he says it takes him a year to write a joke, getting every word perfect. But in late night, they're very specific. You don't like to think in stand-up in terms of formulas or being formulaic. That's not good. You want to be an original. But in late night, you have to think in terms of formula. If you listen to the language, the musicality of it, they all use the same sort of terminology, and there's a reason for that. It works. The setup is da-da-da-da-da, or as we call it, blank. That's the joke. Da-da-da-da-da. Apparently is used at the beginning as a bridge to so many punchlines in late night. So there are a lot of formulas and techniques and expressions that get you from point A to point B. If you want me to sort of quickly break down how a monologue joke works, the setup is a simple factual statement based on a news story. It should not be funny. It's got to be just simple and factual. If there's too much information, the audience, the listener freaks out and they won't be able to listen to the punchline with a receptive ear. So you got to keep the setup really simple, and it's got to be conversational. Another problem I find is too many writers for late night when they start out are doing it, on their computer, and so it becomes too literate in the sense that it's not really colloquial or how we speak. So
it's more like prose than it is like spoken word.
Right. It is a stand-up of the sorts. Yes, exactly. And you're communicating with people. So I always suggest, tweaking the joke on the page, and then going back to the voice recorder to make it more conversational. So you have the simple factual statement as a setup. Then the punchline, the very last word or two words of the punchline has to be where the humor is. And the problem with that most beginning writers face is they give away, or what we call telegraph the punch too early, so that there's no surprise afterward. And once the surprise is gone, the joke is over. So in other words, the setup is almost like climbing the roller coaster, and then the punchline is a straight drop down. But if that drop isn't straight, meaning at the last word, it just kind of meanders and it doesn't have the same effect. And I can give you an example of a joke and how it's constructed really quickly.
Sure.
So I was with Letterman during both the parts of Clinton's administration and Bush. And of course, when the Monica scandal happened, every night we closed with a Monica joke that was, and Clinton joke that was, about the scandal, and that was what we would call blue or dirty, but it was clean enough to do on CBS. And the reason we did it every night is because it's such a forbidden subject for network, we knew it would get the biggest laugh. Everybody knew what happened there, so you didn't have to explain what happened, but everybody knew what it was. So anything that sort of implied it would be probably funnier than the rest of the joke. So I had a joke when Clinton first got caught. About a couple months later, he hired 2 spiritual advisors to come and pray with him every week in the Oval Office. So I thought, okay, there's got to be a joke here. There's politician's gesture of being contrite. So my joke was President Clinton has hired 2 spiritual advisors to come and pray with him every week. Great, just so we need more people in the Oval Office on their knees. Not proud of it, but I think for illustration purposes, so there's the simple factual statement. President Clinton has hired 2 spiritual advisors to come and pray with him. So now what I do is I look for handles. Handles are 2 things or more things in the joke that are completely separate that you can tie together in a funny and unexpected way. And I would say that's about 90% of all monologue jokes, are 2 or more subjects tied together in a funny and unusual, unexpected way. So in this case, I knew what the handles were. Very often it's difficult, but this was going to be Monica and the spiritual advisors, no question. So I start going through a mental Rolodex. What do spiritual advisors do that could tie back to Monica Lewinsky? I'm thinking, well, they wear robes. Maybe there's a tie-in with her blue dress and the stain. It's not that close. What else do they do? They pray. They're on their knees. And that's that light bulb moment where you found the intersection of your 2 topics. Now, interestingly, the original way I wrote that joke was just we need more people on their knees in the Oval Office. It would still get a laugh, but it would not get the same laugh as more people in the Oval Office on their knees, because knees is the punch word and has to go last. And because it's last, the essential information in the setup also has to come last, so you can remember it when you get to the punch word. That's part of the problem. Like, you would never start a joke, a setup, by saying something like, President Trump met with Kim Jong-un on Monday at 12 o'clock at a palace in North Korea. No, that's the least essential information. We've now forgotten about what the joke is going to be about, which is about the meeting between Kim and Trump. So you need to reverse that. You need to say on Monday at noon at the Imperial Palace, President Trump met with Kim Jong-un. Right. So that information is fresh enough that they can remember it when you get to the punch word. So there's a real science to this that doesn't exist in stand-up. People break the rules all the time in stand-up, and I love that. It's about being an original. And here it really is about, there really are templates for late night jokes.
Well, Gabe, I want to ask you, if you were, as a writer, did you have some jobs that were, I guess, not normal, that were kind of nuts or crazy jobs while you were all that time? They couldn't have all been perfect gigs.
As a writer?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Well, something happened a few years ago. That's the first thing that comes to mind.
What's the craziest job you ever had?
As a writer.
Yeah.
The craziest job I ever had was probably about 5 or 6 years ago. I got hired by, I think he was, I don't know, he was from somewhere in the Middle East, multi-billionaire who created some TV network. And he wanted me to write promo spots, funny spots, for a device that was an electrical energy thing or vibrated that apparently did everything from cure cancer to stop heart disease. And it was just like, it looked like the little buzzer that you just put in your pocket. And I said, okay, so, we need to get the inventor of this on the commercial talking about it. He said, no, the inventor He lives overseas, he's not coming over here to do it. I said, well, we need to show the device. And they said, well, it hasn't actually been built yet. And he said, we thought you and the other writer could get in white lab coats and be the doctors talking about this device. So it's a non-existent device with me playing a doctor trying to sell this thing.
A non-existent doctor?
Right, with a non-existent treatment. And so I said, no, I can't do that. But it was crazy. He had this he bought a building on Rodeo Drive, most expensive street in the world, probably. And it was insanity. I'm sure there've been plenty of other ones along the way. But that was crazy. I'd never been asked to do that in a writing job, to play a fake doctor, to sell a product that didn't exist. That ain't writing.
No, it isn't. What about, you had, I guess, you've been teaching for how long now?
Oh my goodness, since '83. So maybe longer than anyone in the country, 37 years. Okay.
Now in that time you had, I imagine you've had many students.
Oh yeah. I have students on almost every late night talk show. Actually one student.
Okay, can you mention some of the students who they are?
Yeah, sure. I had a student actually out here in LA at Flappers not too many years ago named Trevon Free, who's one of the most successful writers in the industry now. He wrote for The Daily Show, for Samantha Bee, he's written pilots. He's a really hot commodity. I had another student in the 80s named Michael Platt, who came to my class as an attorney, one of the hottest sitcom and movie writers in Hollywood right now. I've had, you probably know Eddie Pepitone, the comic.
Sure.
He was a student of mine, hilarious guy. Gary Greenberg, who's been the head writer at Jimmy Kimmel for, I think, since the beginning, if not for at least 15 years. He was one of my stand-up students. And like I said, I have students on staff almost everywhere. So that's a thing that I love. That gives me as much satisfaction as getting a job myself, if not more so, is taking someone who hasn't really done this, who doesn't have experience, and getting them to the point where they can get the job, which they're much more likely to do because they're all younger than me. So ageism is alive and well.
Well, I hope that that's actually changing. I mean, certainly you've got the chops for all these different roles, which is really nice. You've got the chops as a stand-up comic. You have the chops as a writer, and a comic for the club scene, a comic for TV, for warm-up, as for a writer for television and elsewhere. You have proved that you can write for other comedians. All of those are different roles that are part of a bigger bucket, so to speak. Well, look, Gabe, why did you transition from stand-up performer to writing for others? I mean, why was there something deeper than, it wasn't just a job opportunity.
That is a great question, and one that I've never been asked, and I've done a lot of interviews. I've never been asked that question. It's a great question. Yes. And it was something that I think I had to come to terms with. I talked about Sam Kinison and Bill Hicks and Dave Attell sort of bearing their soul, and we won't mention Louis C.K., but I just did. He was another one who, it didn't end up being much surprise because he talked about that kind of thing in his act. But I was never someone that was particularly comfortable with, I couldn't really make that connection. I didn't show that side of my inner turmoil. That wasn't my thing. So I found out that I can reveal someone else's inner turmoil. I just do better. And you know how this is as a comic. It's much easier for you to think of lines for other people's act than for your own act.
Sometimes when you're sitting, that was a favorite thing for me because I love stand-up comedy and I love comedians. And I felt, to me, it was like, look, it's the 21st century now. And while it's not the medieval era, I felt like stand-up comedy was almost like a guild in a sense, right? It was like a brotherhood in a sense.
And it really was.
It was really special. And so for me, I felt fortunate to be able to, I was the kind of guy who would go to the back of the room after my set to watch another comedian. Or I'd come in before my set to watch the other comics. And I'd watch, if there were 8 shows in a week, it was not uncommon for me to come in and watch all the shows. And because I knew it was good for me physically, mentally, emotionally, but also because I loved it for the craft of it. And it was normal for me to watch and to, like you said, come up with punchlines or, a whole premise that could be tacked onto something, tags, what have you, and then write them down. And if the guy was amenable to it, if he was open, I love to be able to share them. And then I'd come back if the guy said, "Hey man, thanks a lot. These are really funny." I'd come back for the next show and, sort of work together while I'm in the back of the room saying, okay, is there a way to improve that even more? Mm-hmm. Is that similar for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I used to have ideas for stand-ups like you all the time, sitting in the back of the room watching them, and I would come up with taglines for their stuff. But I think the actual, doing that as an occupation just really appealed to me. And even to this day, I think there was just something magical about the whole Letterman thing. Because even today, when I'm writing jokes for others or even for myself, I still have Dave's voice in my ear. For whatever reason, I write in his voice. And so that it kind of makes sense that all happened.
Can we just for a minute break out for just a second? Because you just said something that's totally compelling to me and totally fascinating.
Sure.
I know we've talked about this particular topic just a little bit before, not today, but in previous conversations, because you and I actually worked together on another radio show.
Yes, we did.
In NLP, there's something that's called modeling, which is the core of neuro-linguistic programming. And what you just said, what I noticed, is you said, I still have Dave's voice in my ear. And you took your right hand and you pointed it to your right ear, right about here. And if I mention that to you, you can hear his voice right now, can't you?
Yes, I can.
If I ask you to point with your finger, I know we're in audio, so the folks can't really see this, or they might not be able to see this, but if I ask you to point exactly where it's at, is it right about at your right ear or your left ear?
I'd say it's more in my head.
It's sort of in your head and it's at that spot right there?
Yeah, right there.
It's in the spot that's like, I guess that's not too far off from the visual cortex, and it's behind the parietal lobe. It's not necessarily in your brain, it's in a space in your mind, correct?
Right.
And what's the other thing, if I can share, because I find your story totally riveting. I think it's a fantastic story.
Oh, thank you.
And when I'm watching you, I also noticed that something that I'm not sure if you're aware of it, that when you mention David Letterman's voice, or many times when you're mentioning these other comics and the comics are in your story speaking, you look down into your left. You're actually looking down into your left, but you're hearing their voice sort of up and to your right, it seems. Is that correct?
That's yes, absolutely. That's pretty dead on.
Yeah, and I also noticed, if you don't mind me sharing this with you, because I've been watching really closely, having a ball, paying really close attention, is that you sometimes, when you really get into it, you'll start to rock back and forth, and you'll have a kind of rhythm, like in your rocking motion. It's like You're really jamming to whatever it is that you're doing. You're getting your whole body into it, so I can see your eyes are moving, and your body's rocking, and your hands are gesticulating, and you're it's like you're almost kind of, almost wizardly kind of air sculpting with your gesticulations in front of you. And it's really something to watch. And it's not meant to, I hope I'm not making you feel embarrassed or vulnerable at all.
No, not at all. I find it quite interesting. And I am very passionate about it. And that's probably what you're reading. I'm not the most animated guy, but when I start talking about comedy, the synapse is open and fire and everything is going on. Yeah. I love talking shop.
Really interesting. We talked about a lot of things today. We talked about stand-up comedy and we talked about writing. And there are some other things that you're involved in, though, that are also loves or things that you're kind of passionate about. And one of them is mentalism.
Yes.
Is that true?
That is true. That is true. I do mentalism performances that are solely mentalism.
If what is it that is makes it so passionate for you about mentalism?
Well, as I've evolved, I mean, it sort of started with, props and things like that for mentalism. What I'm really into now is completely propless stuff, just mind to mind, and using, like you said, NLP and techniques to have people reveal information that they don't even know they're revealing. And then when you reveal it, it seems like you're reading their mind. Basically, there's a guy named, terrific mentalist named Banachek. Steve Shaw is his real name.
Sure, I'm familiar with it.
And he describes when people say, what do you do? And he says at the beginning of his act, and every mentalist uses this, I don't use it, but it is right on the money. He said, I use my 5 senses to give the illusion of a sixth. I use psychology, suggestion, intuition, which is not part of the 5 senses. There is something extra. And I'll tell you something, now having done it for about 20 years, I scare myself sometimes when I nail things right about people and their lives. When I do a reading, I don't do readings with tarot cards or anything, but I'll do just a cold reading. And I think a lot of it is actually pretty dry. I think a lot of it is statistical, because I know in certain situations now, having performed certain demonstrations so many times, how people are likely to react. And what's very interesting is it's cultural, I found, because I travel around the world doing this. And certain things that work in the States on everybody not only don't work on people from other cultures where English isn't the native language, but they won't even work on people from Canada or the UK. And I don't know what that is about necessarily, but it's very interesting how a lot of it is cultural.
Hypothesis about why that might be, or no?
I can only assume that it has to do with our upbringing and the way we were raised and where we were raised, and maybe what our go-to references are in our mind that you can hang something on for Americans, but may not translate in another culture. There's a great video by Darren Brown, who's probably the greatest mentalist in the world. He's had a show in the West End in London. He's phenomenal. And this whole approach now of NLP and psychological suggestion, that was Darren that started that whole trend. But there's a great video of him on YouTube called Paying with Paper. And he has cut out pieces of paper the exact same size as currency, as bills. And he goes into a butcher shop and he uses some NLP and he does some mirroring, and he says, can I take the subway? I said, I can't go there from here. But my friend said, no, take it. And he's saying this as he's handing over the paper. Right. Obviously, there's more to it than that. And the guy takes the paper as payment. And Darren walks out, and they keep the camera on this guy, telephoto lens. And you can see the guy just gets very confused and eventually realizes he's been taken. Then he goes into a jewelry store and he buys a $5,000 diamond ring with paper.
Yeah, I remember.
Then he goes to a hot dog vendor from India to buy $1 hot dog. And the guy looks at the paper and he goes, what is this? This is paper, this is bullshit. And he throws it down. And so here he is able to buy a diamond ring with someone from his own culture, but can't sell it, even for a $1 hot dog. And I was very impressed that he included that, because that's exactly how it works. And
I remember what you're talking about, by the way, with the particularly the one where he goes in, the one you mentioned where he goes into the fish store and he buys the fish. And it took me a while to get what he was doing. And that moment that you're referring to, if I'm remembering correctly from what you said, he goes to the back of the store and he's got the package of food, which is a kind of fish. It's sole, I believe, is the kind of fish that he has, SOLE. And he starts to tell a story, and I paid attention and I went, oh my gosh, this is what they call nested loops in hypnosis and NLP. And he starts one story and then does not finish the story, but starts a second story and tells that story. And that story is the one that has the line that actually is the bridge and acts like he says, that is what he says. He says, no. And they just said, just take it. Right. So I took it. And that's the story is just take it is referring to what he's talking about in the story. But at that exact moment is where he takes the piece of paper that is not money and hands it to the guy who just takes it and puts it away in the register as if it's a real bill, like a 10 or 20 or whatever it may be. It's
Correct.
absolutely remarkable what can be done with mentalism and with hypnosis and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's funny because people often ask me, like, how does this possibly tie into what you've been doing for 40 years with comedy? And I think, because I've given that a lot of thought, and I think the similarity is that with mentalism, it's shock and awe. I mean, people just don't know what to, you surprise them with something that's absolutely impossible. You reveal something, at this point I'm trying to do this, where nobody's written anything down, nobody's said anything, and you reveal information, and that's sort of you're in a punchline, with a punch word at the end, like I talked about the roller coaster drop, you're pulling the rug out from under their mind when you surprise them with a punchline. And I think you're also pulling the rug out from under their mind when you surprise them as a mentalist, or even though I don't do magic, I mean, I think that's what magic is as well. You're just, you're leading them down the garden path. It's exactly how a joke works. And then suddenly turning a corner on them.
Yeah, there's that element of misdirection and surprise.
Exactly.
And it's from an auditory perspective, it's a kind of sleight of mouth. In fact, I remember
sleight of mind.
I remember and it's a kind of sleight of mind that both of them share. And in comedy, it's a misdirection, it's a sleight of mouth, but in magic, it's usually a kind of sleight of hand. Both
right. There's no sleight of hand in mentalism.
Quality, which is a sleight of mind.
Right.
I remember watching, going to the comedy or the Magic Castle, and watching what the guy did. I was at one of the theaters, and it occurred to me as I was watching, there are certain phrases and things like that, certain things in certain grammars that we apply every day, and those grammars cause our mind to jump ahead and to project. And the comedian, the writer, will take advantage of that opportunity to create the misdirection. And so in the same way that comedians will do that in speaking, or a writer will do it in writing, it seems like the magician or mentalist will do a similar thing with body language and voice and whatnot.
Absolutely. Reading body language and is a huge part of it.
Yeah. Gabe, this has been absolutely enjoyable for me. And I want to ask you, you teach. Do you have some classes that are coming up soon? Or
I do. In fact, I have one starting May 11th at Flappers Comedy Club out here. If anybody's interested, they can look up Flappers Comedy Club Burbank. And they have an entire university dedicated to, with different teachers of stand-up. I teach the Writing for Late Night Television class, but I also do private Skype sessions with comics and wannabe late night writers from all over the world, actually. It's, for me, I love like I said, I love doing it. It's very rewarding. If anybody wants to contact me, I mean, I have, like I said, a pretty good track record of getting people on shows. So for somebody that's already doing comedy, the private sessions are probably best. For someone that's never written comedy at all, I would say the Flappers course, because it starts from zero, where I actually lay out how to do all this stuff, would probably be the way to go. Okay.
Now that's at Flappers Comedy Club, which is it's in the Valley. It's in Burbank, over at the Media City Center, I believe.
Yes, exactly.
And how many is it one class? Is it more than one class?
It's right now it's a 4-week class. Before COVID it was 6 weeks, but the price is a lot lower now too, because it's only 4 weeks. And then the 5th week, I take their jokes and do a monologue with it from one of the Zoom comedy clubs. So they get to see what it's like to have their material tweaked a bit and then delivered by somebody else. Because most of the students I have, or a lot of the students I have, are comics or people just starting out in comedy. And so they've never really written for anyone but themselves. So they get to have that experience as well. But I highly recommend it for anyone that wants to go into TV writing.
Yeah, and I can say from knowing you that you are a funny man, and it's pretty obvious that you know what you're talking about. Well, Gabe, I hope that you'll come back again.
Would love to, Doc.
Conversation today. And I would just like to thank you for being here today. I know if we had any listeners calling in today, they'd probably be thanking you too. And what we're going to do now is we're going to wrap up our program. This has been the Robert Barham Show today, and our guest was Gabe Abelson. And you can check out Gabe, like he said, you can find him at the Media City Center at Flappers Comedy Club, which you can go ahead to online on the web. And if you're interested, check out his class that he is teaching.
And if they want to get in touch with me privately, they can hit me up on Facebook too, if they'd like.
And your name is like it sounds. It's can you spell your name? Do you mind?
Sure. First name is Gabe, G-A-B-E. Last name Abelson, A-B-E-L-S-O-N.
Very good. Gabe Abelson, thanks, my friend. And we will talk with you again.
Sounds great, Doc.
Have a fantastic afternoon.
You too. Good to see you.